Forget the Super Bowl for a second. Forget the flags, the Spanish lyrics, the political debate, all of that came later. Because before Bad Bunny became a headline, before he became a controversy, before professors were analyzing him in university lecture halls, he was already doing something that nobody in his genre had the nerve to do. He showed up in a skirt. And that, quietly, was the beginning of everything. Shh, turn the volume up, but keep it low. This is Rap Deepest Secrets, the one place the labels can't control, exposing the codes, the cover-ups, the real cost of fame. Help us to monetization by subscribing. Now, back to the video. To understand why Bad Bunny's fashion choices caused a near-cultural earthquake, you have to understand what reggaeton was before he arrived. Reggaeton was built on a very specific image: tough, dominant, untouchable. The genre came out of the streets of Puerto Rico in the late 80s and 90s, born from struggle, from marginalization, from a community that was looked down on by mainstream society and even by its own government. The Puerto Rican governor at the time didn't embrace reggaeton. Officials called it delinquent music. Radio stations refused to play it. It was considered low-class, vulgar, dangerous. So what did reggaeton artists do? They leaned into the image, hard. Because when the world tells you that you and your music are a threat, you either shrink or you make yourself bigger, louder, harder, more intimidating. You don't show softness, you don't show vulnerability, you definitely don't show up in painted nails. That was the unspoken rule. Nobody wrote it down, nobody had to. Every artist in the genre just knew. Masculinity was the armor. Toughness was the brand, and that image protected both the artists and the genre itself. Then, Bad Bunny walked in and set the armor on fire. It started subtly, painted males. That's it. That was the first thing. And the reaction from people, specifically Latino men, was immediate and disproportionate. Bad Bunny himself addressed it directly, saying he didn't think painted nails would bother people the way they did, specifically Latino men. Let that land. Painted nails on a grown man caused that level of reaction. But here's the suspicious part. Why? Why does nail polish on a reggaeton artist threaten anyone? What exactly is at stake when a man decides to paint his fingernails? The answer, once you sit with it, reveals something uncomfortable about the culture that reggaeton exists inside. A culture where masculinity is so fragile, so carefully constructed, and so constantly policed that something as small as colored fingernails reads as a full-on attack on the system. Bad Bunny didn't start a fight. He just painted his nails, and somehow that was enough. If the nails were a warning shot, what came next was a full statement. Bad Bunny started incorporating skirts and dresses into his public appearances and performances. In a genre where the visual language had been almost rigidly masculine for decades, oversized fits, chains, the whole aesthetic, this was not a small thing. This was a direct challenge to the image that reggaeton had spent years building. And the people who were the most bothered? Not strangers, not outsiders, people within the Latino community itself, people who loved the genre, grew up on it, claimed it as their own. The discomfort was internal, which made it sting in a specific way. Because it's one thing to be criticized by people outside your culture. It's another thing entirely when people inside your own community look at how you're showing up and say, that's not how we do things here. Bad Bunny heard all of it and kept wearing the skirts. In 2020, Bad Bunny released the music video for Yo Perreo Sola, and he got a full drag makeover for it. People lost their minds. The song itself, the title translates roughly to I Twerk Alone, was already a statement about women's autonomy on the dance floor, a direct pushback against men who insert themselves uninvited into women's personal space at parties. The message was clear. Sometimes a woman wants to dance by herself, and that should be respected. But the visual? Bad Bunny, one of the most streamed artists on the planet, in full drag, embodying the message rather than just singing it, that was a level of commitment that nobody in the genre had ever attempted. It wasn't a joke, it wasn't ironic, it was intentional, carefully executed, and deeply uncomfortable for a large section of his audience. And it worked, not because everyone loved it, because it made people talk and think and argue and question things about their own assumptions that they hadn't questioned before. That is what art is supposed to do. Now, here is where the story shifts from fashion into something heavier. Bad Bunny appeared on a live television performance wearing a shirt that read, "They killed Alexa, not a man in a skirt." Translation, they killed Alexa, not a man in a skirt. Alexa was a transgender woman in Puerto Rico who was murdered, brutally, senselessly, and whose death was reported by some outlets in a way that misgendered her, described her by the clothing she wore instead of her name, and stripped her of her identity even in death. Bad Bunny wore her name on a live TV stage, in front of millions of people, without warning, without a press release, without turning it into a publicity moment. He just showed up in the shirt. That is not a fashion statement. That is not Gen Z aesthetics. That is a man using the biggest platform available to him to say her name was Alexa, and what happened to her was wrong. Think about that in context. This is a reggaeton artist, a genre historically associated with hyper-masculinity, with lyrics that have not always been kind to women, with a culture that has struggled with homophobia and transphobia openly, and one of its biggest stars is standing on live television demanding justice for a murdered transgender woman. The cognitive dissonance that caused in people was not accidental. That was the whole point. Real talk, if this video is making you think about things differently, if you're seeing connections you didn't see before, that's exactly what this channel is built for. We don't do surface level. We find the thread that ties everything together and pull it until the whole picture comes out. Subscribe right now if you're not already. Hit the notification bell, because the next video hits even harder than this one, and you genuinely don't want to miss it. Here's what most people get wrong about Bad Bunny. They look at the painted nails, the skirts, the drag video, the protest shirt, and they assume he's making a calculated political statement, that there's a PR team behind it, that it's branding, that it's strategy. But consider this. Bad Bunny started doing all of this before he was the most streamed artist in the world 3 years running. He was challenging Reggaeton'S image before he had the kind of fame that makes people untouchable. He was wearing Alexa's name on his shirt when taking that kind of stance in Latin media could have cost him radio play, brand deals, and audience loyalty. He wasn't doing it from a position of safety, he was doing it from a position of risk. And that changes everything about how it should be interpreted. Because the easiest thing in the world, the thing every artist is advised to do by managers, labels, and publicists, is to stay in your lane, protect the brand. Don't alienate your core audience. Give the people what they already expect. Bad Bunny looked at all of that advice and chose differently. Not after he was famous enough to survive the backlash, while the backlash could still do real damage. That's not a trend. That's a conviction. The real rebellion wasn't the music. It was never just the music. It was how he showed up, what he wore, what he allowed himself to be seen as, and how deeply uncomfortable that made people who had very specific ideas about what a reggaeton artist was supposed to look like. He walked into a genre built on a specific kind of masculinity and said, "I'm going to be myself inside this space." And if that makes you uncomfortable, that's actually useful information about you. Most people in his position would have played the role, would have worn the armor, would have followed the image, because following the image is what keeps careers alive in a genre with very strict unspoken codes. Bad Bunny didn't. And the fact that he didn't, not after he was safe, but from the beginning, is what makes him genuinely different from everyone else in the conversation. He wasn't performing rebellion. He was just refusing to perform something he wasn't. And in a genre, in a culture where the pressure to perform a specific kind of identity is enormous, constant, and comes from the people closest to you, that quiet refusal is one of the most radical things a person can do. If this video made you see Bad Bunny differently, or made you think about the culture around masculinity, music, and identity in a new way, that's what this channel exists to do. Subscribe if you haven't already. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Genuinely curious what you think about this one. New content coming regularly, and we're only going deeper from here. See you in the next video.